بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين لا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم ربنا آتنا في الدنيا حسنة وفي الآخرة حسنة وقنا عذاب النار. The author rahimahullah is going to go on to discuss the section Bab Sujud Sahwi, and the Bab Sujud Sahwi we can translate as the prostration of forgetfulness. And according to the Malikiyya, this prostration is sometimes done before salam and it is sometimes done after salam. And for other schools, either it is done completely before salam or it is done completely after salam. So there are some circumstances in our school that necessitate that we're going to make 2 sajdas before salam, and there are some circumstances where we're going to be requested to make 2 sajdas after salam. So after salam or before salam. And the way in which we make the sajdas is after we finish performing the tashahhud, we're going to make the 2 sajdas. And then after the 2 sajdas, we're going to sit back and we're going to make the tashahhud again. And then without the salawat on the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and then say assalamu alaikum again to sign out of the prayer. So all of that the author will clarify inshallah. The first thing that he's going to clarify is to let us know where or when we are to make sajda before salam. So he says, with sujud sahwi sajdatani qabla salamihi. He says making prostration is 2 sajdas qabla salam in naqasa sunnatan muakkadatan. If he misses a sunnah muakkada, meaning a stressed and emphasized sunnah. And according to the Malikiyya, the sunnah muakkada are 8. The first one is the recitation of a surah in the first and the second rak'ah. So after the Surah Al-Fatiha, reading a surah, reading a surah or piece of a surah. Usually they use the word surah, but it doesn't mean a complete one. It just means that even reading one ayah after the Surah Al-Fatiha is a sunnah mu'akkada. Wal-jahru means to read out loud in the rak'ahs that necessitate reading out loud, which is the first 2 of the Maghrib, the first 2 of the Isha, and all of Salatul Subh. They are requested to be read out loud, and reading out loud means that you can recite enough that the person beside you could hear you. And that's in regards to men. In regards to women, it is enough that she can hear herself, is enough for her to fulfill the sunnah mu'akkada. After that we have was-sirru. Was-sirru means to recite quietly in those rak'ahs that necessitate that you recite quietly, which is all of the other rak'ahs other than the ones that we just mentioned in jahru. Wa-takbir, making the takbir other than the takbiratul ihram, other than the takbir that you'd use to enter into the prayer. All those other takbirs are sunnah mu'akkada. But what does it mean? Contrary to what we to the rest of what we mentioned, in order for a person to make sajda for the takbir, which means the saying of Allahu Akbar when you move from different positions in prayer, you would have to miss a combination of 2 of those in order to make sajda, in order to have to make sajda before salam. So although the takbir is sunnah mu'akkada, you have to miss 2 in order to be requested to make sajda before salam. After that we have what tasmi'. What tasmi' means sami Allahu liman hamida, like what the people say after the imam raises his head, or what the imam says or the individual says when he's praying alone. So when you're raising from ruku, you say sami Allahu liman hamida. If you were to miss also like the takbir, you have to miss 2 of these in order for a person to have to make sajda qabla salam for missing a sunnah mu'akkada. Now, in terms of the takbir and the tasbih, I mentioned that if you miss 2 takbirs, you have to make sajda before salam, or if you miss 2 tasmis, then you have to make sajda before salam. The reality is it can be a combination of both. Let's say you miss one takbir, you miss one Allahu Akbar, and then you miss one Sami Allahu liman hamida, then you're going to make sajda before salam. So either you miss two takbirs or two tasmis, or you have a combination of both, meaning you miss one of one and one of the other, then it would still necessitate that you make sajda before salam. Then the next one is the tashahhud al-awwal, and the tashahhud al-awwal is the tashahhud that a person makes in the second rak'ah. So the tashahhud, when we start at-tahiyyatu lillahi, az-zakiyatu lillahi, at-tayyibatu salawatu lillahi, all the way down to the tashahhud, which is shadu an la ilaha illallah wa ashhadu anna muhammadan abduhu wa rasuluh. Then until here, that is considered the sunnah mu'akkada, not the salawat on the Prophet. So when you make the salawat on the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam at the end, that's not what we're talking about here when we say tashahhud. So missing that tashahhud in the second rak'ah is a sunnah mu'akkada. If you miss that, then the person should make sajda before salam. Then what tashahhud al-thani, the second tashahhud, is the tashahhud in the fourth rak'ah. If you miss that individually, then you're making sajda before salam. Then the last one is the sitting wa julus al-awwal, meaning the sitting in the second rak'ah that you do while you're reading the tashahhud. It is a sunnah mu'akkada on its own. And so if a person were to miss that, then he's requested to make sajda before salam. So those are the sunnah mu'akkadas that he's talking about when the author says in naqasa sunnatan mu'akkadatan. So if a person misses a sunnah mu'akkada, then he has to make sajda qabla salam. Then the imam is going to go on to talk about the manner in which we make the tashahhud, which I clarified at the beginning. Yatashahhadu lahuma, that he's going to make another tashahhud for the two sajdas, wa yusallimu minha, and then he's going to make salam. What does he mean? After you make the two sajdas, you're going to go back into the sitting position, make the tashahhud without the salawat on the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and then you're going to make another taslim. Then he's going to go on to talk about the things in which necessitate are what a person does if he increases something in his prayer. He says, "Wa in zada sajada ba'da salamihi." Now, what's important here when it says "wa in zada sajada ba'da salamihi," meaning, what does it mean by in zada? If he increases something that is obligatory by accident. Make sure that this is clear. When he talks about in zada, he's talking about increasing an obligatory act, not increasing a sunnah mu'akkada, increasing an obligatory act by accident. The reason why I'm going to clarify this to you, the reason why I say the increase of an obligatory act is to rule out the increase of a sunnah act or a fadila act, because there's no sajda we have no sajda for missing we have no sajda for increasing a sunnah act or increasing a fadila. The sajda is for increasing an obligatory act intentionally. The reason why I mention intentionally is to rule out missing a sunnah act by forgetfulness. My bad, missing it by forgetfulness. And the reason why I say missing it by forgetfulness is to rule out doing it intentionally, because as we already mentioned, increasing an obligatory act intentionally necessitates that a person's prayer becomes invalid. So that's what he means here. Wa in zada sajada ba'da salamihi. Then he's going to make sajda after salam. So after he says assalamu alaikum to exit his prayer, he's going to make two sajdas. Then he's going to sit and he's going to make the tashahhud, and then he's going to make another taslim by saying assalamu alaikum, as we mentioned previously. Now the question will come: what if he increases something? What if he increases a fard act by accident and he decreases, or he misses a sunnah mu'akkada? For example, a person who added a fifth rak'ah to his prayer by accident, or added a sajda to his prayer by accident, but he forgot to do his tashahhud. So now he's requested to make sajda qabla salam, before salam, and he's requested to make sajda after salam. But we're never going to make both of them at once. You're never going to have in one prayer making sajda before salam and then right after making sajda after salam. If there's an increase and if one adds something to the prayer, adds an obligatory act and misses a sunnah act, then the author says, وَإِن نَقَصَ وَزَادَ, if he increases, if he misses a sunnah mu'akkada, وَزَادَ, meaning he increases an obligatory act by accident, sajda qabla salamihi, he's going to make sajda before salam, لِأَنَّهُ يُغَلِّبُ جَانِبَ النَّقْصِ. And he says the reason why we do that is because we give preference to the thing that is missing in the prayer. We're going to give preference to the thing that is missing in the prayer, not give a preference to the thing that is added to the prayer. So that's why he says the enhu yughallibu janib al-naqs, that the side of the naqs is given preference ala janib al-ziyadati, on the give preference over the increase that took place in the prayer. Now the author is going to clarify something for you even more, and he's going to talk about the different manners in which a person can forget. Or because we can either have a person who forgets to do a fard, or we can get a person who forgets to do a fadila or a mustahab, or we can have a person who forgets to do a sunnah. So he's going to break it down. He's going to say wasahi fi salatihi ala thalathati aqsamin. In terms of a person who forgets to perform something in their prayer, we can separate them into three categories. Then he says, sometimes taratan yashu an naqsi fardin min fara'id salatihi. Sometimes that person is one who forgets an obligatory act from his prayer. So now he's going to clarify then what is the ruling of a person who forgets an obligatory act in terms of sujud. فَلَا يُجْبَرُ بِالسُّجُودِ السَّهْوِ وَلَا بُدَّ مِنَ الْإِتْيَانِ بِهِ وَإِنْ لَمْ يَذْكُرْ ذَلِكَ حَتَّى صَلَّمَ وَطَالَ بَطَلَتْ صَلَاتُهُ وَيَبْتَدِئُهَا. He says, as for that person who forgets to do an obligatory act, he is not requested to make a sujud. وَلَا بُدَّ مِنَ الْإِتْيَانِ, but he must do that obligatory act, meaning it is obligatory for him to do that obligatory act. What does this mean? It means, for example, if a person were to remember that they forgot to do an obligatory act in prayer, then it is not sufficient to make a sajda for an obligatory act. We said making a sajda out of forgetfulness is for the sunnah mu'akkada, but if you miss the fard, then you have to do it. So for example, if you were to miss something in your last rak'ah, for example, you missed the sajda, or you missed reading Surah Al-Fatiha, and then you're doing your tashahud, and you remember, at that point that rak'ah becomes valid, and you must stand up and add another rak'ah to it, because there is no sajda for missing a fard. You have to make sure that you stand up and complete it, and that's why it says wala budda min al-ityani bihi, and it's obligatory. It is necessary that a person completes that obligatory act. And then he goes on more to say wa in lam yadhkur dhalika hatta sallama wa tala batalat salatuhu. And if that person did not remember that obligatory act that he missed until he said his salam, so for example, he didn't remember that obligatory act, watala, and the time between the time that he finished his prayer and the time that he remembered was long, his prayer becomes invalid. Example of that is, let's say you're sitting in a mosque, or you finish your prayer and then you stand up and you exit the mosque, and then you remember that, oh, I forgot to do a sajda in my second rak'ah or my third rak'ah or my fourth rak'ah. Then because the time has gone long, then it is not then it's not possible for him to go back and correct his prayer. His prayer becomes invalid, and then the author says وَيَبْتَدِئُهَا, that then which means then he has to begin his prayer all over again. So in short, if you remember and the time is still close, then you can enter back into the prayer from the sitting position and then complete your prayer. Example, right now I'm in the mosque, I forgot to make sajda in my fourth rak'ah, and I say assalamu alaikum. Before I go to read Quran or go talk to somebody beside me, I remember that I missed a sajda in my rak'ah, in my fourth rak'ah, which means that my fourth rak'ah has become invalid. I'm going to right then and there when I'm sitting down say Allahu Akbar to enter back into the prayer, and then stand up and finish the fourth rak'ah and then say assalamu alaikum. Now, if I were to exit the mosque or to start speaking to somebody or to engage in something else other than the prayer, then my prayer would be invalid, as the author mentions. Moving on to the next one, he says وَتَارَةً يَسْهُ عَنْ فَدِيلَةٍ مِنْ فَضَائِلِ صَلَاتِهِ كَالْكُنُوتِ وَرَبَّنَا وَلَكَ الْحَمْدُ أَوْ تَكْبِيرَةٍ وَاحِدَةٍ وَالشِّبْهِ ذَلِكَ. He said, or sometimes a person is one who forgets just the fadila, something that's mustahab, it's not sunnah mu'akkada and it's not fard. He says كَالْكُنُوتِ, just like the kunut, right? Reading the kunut in the second rak'ah fajr, or Rabbana walakal hamd, or saying Rabbana walakal hamd in the prayer, or wa takbiratin wahidatin, or mentioning one takbir. This is important. Or forgetting one takbir. Remember I said it's missing two takbirs, that's sunnah mu'akkada, not one. Only missing one takbir is missing, would only be missing a fadila, and that's why he mentions it here. Aw takbiratin wahidatin wa shibhi dhalik, or anything like it. And what does he mean by anything like it? The tasmi', missing one tasmi', because we said if you miss two tasmi', then you make sajda because it becomes sunnah mu'akkada. So in this case, when a person misses these types of fadila, he says فَلَا سُجُودَ عَلَيْهِ فِي شَيْءٍ مِّن ذَلِكَ, and there is no sajda for this. One is not recommended in any shape, form, or fashion, and not only are they not recommended, they are not allowed to make sajda for it. So that's why he says وَمَتَ سَجَدَ لِشَيْءٍ مِّن ذَلِكَ قَبْلَ سَلَامِهِ بَطَلَتْ صَلَاتُهُ. And he says, and if or whenever a person were to make sajda in his prayer because of this, because of missing a fadila, meaning adding a sajda out of forgetfulness for the sake of missing a fadila, بَطَلَتْ صَلَاتُهُ, his prayer becomes invalid, وَيَبْتَدِئُهَا, and he is to begin it, and he is to restart his prayer over again. Now the reason why he is obligated, the reason why his prayer becomes invalid, because as we said, if he were to make sajda for a fadila, it would mean that he's making sajda out of ignorance, and so he's assuming that he's supposed to make sajda. And we mentioned doing something out of ignorance, because it's something that is obligatory for people to know. It's like doing it intentionally. So him making sajda for a fadila is like intentionally adding a sajda in the prayer, and adding something to the prayer that doesn't belong intentionally nullifies it. Then he goes on to say وَتَارَةً يَسْهُ عَنْ سُنَّةٍ مِّن سُنَنِ صَلَاتِهِ كالسورة مع القرآن أو تكبيرتين أو تشهدين أو الجلوس لهما وما أشبه ذلك. Then he says, or sometimes the person who forgets is a person who misses a sunnah. And he gives an example of the sunnah, and what he's referring to is the sunnah mu'akkadas that I mentioned earlier. He says like a surah, كالسورة مع القرآن, like missing a surah, or like reciting the surah with the Quran, or with the Fatiha. What he means here is just the surah. The surah is from the sunnah mu'akkada. Or takbirataini. Interesting. He says aw takbirataini, or missing two takbirs, because that's from the sunnah mu'akkada. Or at-tashahudaini, or missing one of the tashahuds. Or awul julus lahuma, or missing any of the sittings for the tashahuds. وَمَا أَشْبَهَ ذَلِكَ, and whatever is like that. And what he was referring to is the 7 sunnah mu'akkadas that I mentioned at the beginning. And so he says فَيَسْجُدُ لِذَلِكَ, so he's supposed to make sajda for that, And as we mentioned before, he's going to make sajda qabla salam. And then he's going to say, وَلَا يَفُوتُ السُّجُودُ الْبَعْدِيُّ بِالنِّسْيَانِ وَيَسْجُدُ وَلَوْ ذَكَرَهُ بَعْدَ شَهْرٍ مِّن صَلَاتِهِ. He's talking about here the hukm of sajda after salam. Understand that an important point to make here so that it's clear. Making sajda before salam is a sunnah, but it can be obligatory, because if a person does not make sajda before salam and the sunnahs that he missed were more than 3, then his prayer will become invalid. And so although making sajda whether before salam or after salam is only sunnah, if in the matter of sajda before salam he were to miss 3 sunnahs and not make the sajda before salam, then his prayer would be invalid. If it was less than that, then his prayer would still be considered sound. As in terms of making sajda after salam, the purpose of making sajda after salam is only to push off shaitan, because of the fact that he made you forget in your prayer and made you add something. Because when you're making sajda after salam, you're making sajda because you added something to the prayer, because shaitan made you forget about the amount of rakahs that you had. So in terms of making sajda after salam, back to the text, he says, وَلَا يَفُوتُ سُجُودَ الْبَعْدِيُّ بِالنِّسْيَانِ. He said that the possibility of making the sujud after salam does not expire by forgetting, bin nisyan, by forgetting. What he means here, it doesn't matter if you were to forget about the sajda after salam. For example, if you were to forget 10 hours later, or 5 days later, or 10 days later, and even in the books of fiqh they'll say even a year later, he should make it as soon as he remembers. So if you were in the mosque and you forgot to make sajda after salam and you didn't remember till you got home, just go right down and make the 2 sajdas, make your tashahhud and say assalamu alaikum. That's why he says وَيَسْجُدُهُ وَلَوْ ذَكَرَهُ بَعْدَ شَهْرٍ مِّن صَلَاتِهِ. He says make the sajda even if you remember after a month. So you're just going to stop on the spot, make your 2 sajdas, and say your salam. Do your tashahhud. Make your 2 sajdas, do your tashahhud, and then say assalamu alaikum. Now he's going to talk about an issue. He says, وَلَوْ قَدَّمَ السُّجُودَ الْبَعْدِيَّةَ أَوْ أَخَّرَهُ السُّجُودَ الْقَبْلِيَّةَ أَجْزَأَهُ ذَلِكَ وَلَا تَبْتُلُ صَلَاتُهُ عَلَى الْمَشْهُورِ. There is an important issue here. In other schools of thought, as I mentioned to you before, either they only make sajda after salam, and in some other schools they only make sajda before salam. In the Maliki school, as we see, sometimes you're making sajda after salam and sometimes you're making sajda before salam. But the ulama mentioned, for the sake of observing the difference of opinion in the other schools, because of their strong evidence, if we did something in our prayer that necessitated that we made sajda after salam, but we made sajda before salam, for example, then our prayer would still be considered valid. That's what the author means here. وَلَوْ قَدَّمَ السُّجُودَ الْقَبْلِيَّةِ. If the person were to make the sajda that he was supposed to make after salam by making it before salam, أَوْ أَخَّرَ السُّجُودَ الْقَبْلِيَّةِ, or it was necessary for him to make sajda before salam but he did it after salam, أَجْزَأَهُ ذَلِكَ. That would be sufficient. وَلَا تَبْتُلُ صَلَاتُهُ عَلَى الْمَشْهُورِ. And his prayer would not be considered invalid. So technically speaking, if one were praying behind an Hanafi or a Shafi'i who did something in their prayer that for them it necessitated sajda after salam, but for us it necessitated sajda qabla salam, there would be no problem for us in following going contrary to what we have in following them, because as we mentioned here, it's permissible and our prayer wouldn't become invalid. Although the scholars mentioned that doing that intentionally, meaning for a person who was praying alone, for example, and made sajda and did something and missed the sunnah mu'akkada and made sajda after salam purposely, then it's not permissible. Although his prayer would still be sound, he's doing something that's haram in some cases, and in some cases makruh, disliked. And so one should avoid playing around in that matter. But the only time when they should, observe it, of doing contrary, is when they may be praying behind an imam whose school is different. Then he's going to mention the last issue before closing up this chapter. وَمَنْ لَمْ يَدْرِ مَا صَلَّى الثَّلَاثٍ أَوْ اثْنَتَيْنِ فَإِنَّهُ يَبْنِي عَلَى الْأَقَلِّ. He says, whoever was praying and did not know whether he was praying in his third rak'ah or in his second rak'ah, فَإِنَّهُ يَبْنِي عَلَى الْأَقَلِّ, meaning he is to build upon his prayer according to the least amount. In reality, this principle is what we call bina'un ala yaqeen, to consider yourself to follow that in which you have certainty about. So if you're in your prayer and you have doubt, am I in my third rak'ah or in my second rak'ah? One thing is that you're sure that you pray 2 rak'ahs. You have no doubt about 2 rak'ahs, but the doubt that you have is about the third rak'ah. Because as long as you're determining whether you're in your second or your third rak'ah, you know for sure that you've prayed 2. Your doubt is whether or not you prayed 3. So we say leave the doubt, and the doubt is the third rak'ah, and consider yourself in the second rak'ah because that's what you have yaqeen about. So when he says فَإِنَّهُ يَبْنِي عَلَى الْأَقَلِّ, that he builds upon the least amount, in this scenario that I'm mentioning, it would be the second. And the reason for that is because here you have yaqeen, whereas the third rak'ah would be doubtful. And the principle of fiqh is that yaqeen la yuzalu bishak, that the yaqeen is not removed by doubt. So you have yaqeen that you're in the second rak'ah, you have certainty that you're in the second rak'ah, it's the third rak'ah that's doubtful, so you're going to throw it away, and you're going to add another rak'ah, and then he's going to say after you add that rak'ah وَيَأْتِي بِمَا شَكَّ فِيهِ, so you're going to add that rak'ah وَيَسْجُدُ بَعْدَ سَلَامِهِ, and in this case you're going to make sajda after salam because there's ihtimal. Ihtimal means there's a possibility that there's an increase. So for the possibility of the increase, you're going to make sajda after salam, and then the author, with his extreme manners and adab, says wallahu a'lam, and Allah knows best. And that is the end of the section on sajda sahw. Allahumma salli ala sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'een.